It's Monday, friends, and that means it's time for a Q&A. For those of you just joining us, the rules are very simple. All you have to do is leave your questions down below, and hopefully they'll be answered on next week's show. So we're going to kick this week off with a question from Eugene Lee, who says, Q&A. Do you think the enemies are too good at firing from far distance, and is this very annoying when compared to the older Halo games? Because literally every enemy I saw in you and other content creators' clips could snipe players with whatever weapon they had. So the enemies definitely do have a lot more range in Halo Infinite, and I think that serves a couple of purposes. Part of it is due to, well, pacing. They want to make sure that even though the play spaces are a lot larger, enemies are a lot more spread out, you still have like that Halo fun, you know, where you kind of get into that 30 seconds of fun rhythm. Though in Halo Infinite's case, I think it's been extended to more like 3 minutes of fun. It's very weird how they've been able to kind of take the fast pacing of classic Halo games and kind of translate it into the more open worldy environments. There's a couple of nitpicks that I have, but I'm still kind of like processing and digesting this new combat loop. I do think it is a net positive though. It almost reminds me of like Halo Infinite having its Doom 2016 moment, you know, where it's not quite a classic style campaign, but it is clearly trying to evoke the spirit of the classic style campaigns, and despite it being so new, it's like, you don't really mind that it's not like the old one, because, you know, this still feels like Halo, even though it's something quite new on its own. I think that for the sake of pacing, that's why the AI are a lot more accurate, but I also think a lot of it is due to the player's enhanced mobility, the unlimited grappling hook, because you are kind of like Spider-Manning your way around the environment. The player isn't really rooted to the floor, they're not really obeying the laws of gravity. Like verticality, what's that? You know, you can move up to multiple stories just by looking. And so the enemy AI are a lot more kind of like zeroed in on where the player is. What is nice though is that most of them are armed with projectiles, even the Mangler. It has a little bit of a bullet drop. So you can, if you just stay moving, you can dodge a lot of those. What I would like though is I would actually like 343 to explore maybe the idea of like DLC skulls that can further modify AI behavior, because I do find that you do feel a bit bullied into using the armor abilities. You can definitely feel the pressure if you try to play it more like a traditional Halo campaign, where you try to make sure you're using the resources around you, not just like core player superpowers. It could be an awesome way for 343 to explore like replayability, because I think what they have here as kind of like this simulation world of Halo, like there's a lot of room for expanding it and improving replay value via skulls that modify that AI's behavior. I think of kind of like, you get games kind of like Ghost Recon Wildlands, which isn't exactly, I wouldn't say it's even close to the same like quality as Halo Infinite, but what I think Ubisoft did really well with Ghost Recon Wildlands is they kind of realized that it's more fun if you give players more ways to fiddle and tweak with the gameplay experience to get it into a place where they feel like they've established a fun rhythm. So I'd love to see some DLC skulls. Stuff like being able to make enemies blind past a certain range, maybe make them fire less frequently, more slowly. You could even disable the melee on certain units and stuff. Just fiddle and tweak the AI, and then you could have kind of like your own Halo campaign experience. Endless replay value right there. But yeah, I think as of right now, the accuracy of the enemies in the campaign, it works within the style of gameplay that Halo Infinite wants, which is very much an enhanced mobility shooter. And now we're going to move on to a question from Thomas P, who says, Q&A. Regarding Infinite's soundtrack, which game in the series do you think it sounds the closer to? So it's interesting. It's not one single game that it reminds me of. As Rebecca can probably attest to this, the last week or so, my new ADHD brainworm is a specific song in the Halo Infinite soundtrack called Sequence. It kind of got stuck in there, and now I'm quite obsessed with it. It's probably my favorite song on the soundtrack. And what I actually did was I actually lost sleep doing this. I stumbled upon it in the campaign, and I actually muted all game audio except for music, and I recorded it, and then I would deliberately die and reset my checkpoints because the adaptive music of the game would modify the instruments a bit. Sometimes a bass would come in, sometimes there would be a bit more percussion, And so I recorded many different versions of it, and I think I was able to identify all of the different stems of the song sequence. That kind of like spiraled into its own thing, where now I'm listening to all sorts of different songs in the soundtrack, and the best way I can describe it is it tries to be in the spirit of the original trilogy. When it comes to some of the more low-key stuff, you got very simplistic instrument usage. You got a lot of like just chill, tribalistic drum beats, which are very reminiscent of Halo Combat Evolved. Sometimes to the point where the soundtrack is fine just using drums. Then sometimes you have some like ambience-y stuff where you've got like these haunting dreamlike choirs that are mixed into synths, and that kind of reminds me of a lot of the atmosphere of Halo 3, the way it was able to make like Forerunner environments feel very dreamy and ghost-like. But then you have what are called bangers, where it's just like you enter a combat situation and the coolest song starts playing. And it's just like, yeah, this is a banger track right here. And that reminds me a lot of Halo 2. You think of things like Unyielding from Halo 2, that's a banger track. And Halo Infinite has those, so it takes all the best aspects of the original trilogy and tries to use as many of them as it can. And then it also does something that I think is very important for Halo music, which is iteration. So Halo soundtracks traditionally, they don't ever just ditch old songs 'cause new game. You know, sometimes they'll actually take old songs, recompose them in a way that fits the new game that they're in, and they won't modify them too much. They just modify the spirit of it a bit, and that's something that carried on up into Halo Reach. So it was a pleasant surprise during Halo Infinite to hear things like Under Cover of Night just being back. And it's a lot slower paced, it feels a little bit more in the pacing of Halo Infinite's gameplay loop, or Through the Trees, and which is a cover of Under Cover of Night. It's just, Halo has always done that. It's always referenced its own music, whether it's during gameplay or in the story, and it's cool to have a bit of that musical continuity back. What I would say though is I feel like some of the songs in the Infinite soundtrack, it's not a problem with the songs, it's a problem more so with the way that engagements are set up. So there are instances in the campaign where you can hear A Walk in the Woods. The problem is a lot of those engagements are over very quickly. And the Infinite version of Walk in the Woods, it actually takes a bit of time to get going and build itself up. So usually by the time it gets to the proper chorus of A Walk in the Woods that we all know and love, well, the fight's almost done. So the music immediately begins winding down, and a lot of people have said, I don't think it's in the game, I didn't hear it. It's like, you probably did. It's probably you beat all the enemies a little bit too fast. And that's, unfortunately, that's a symptom of kind of open world game design. You can't exactly have a level where for a good stretch of it, A Walk in the Woods is playing, and the level is designed around matching the pacing of the music. So, those are my thoughts on the Infinite music. It's very good. The next question comes from Isaiah Braddock, who says, yay, the Q&A is back. Are there any sections that you wish weren't in the game, or that you got stuck on? So, there aren't any pieces that I wish were not in the game. I will say a quote from the game, and a lot of you will know what I'm talking about. Spartan's not so tough, I think. Break open easy. Soft inside. Yeah, our buddy Bassus. He's a champ, That was a very fun presentation for a boss fight. I really like him because of his voice acting and his performance and personality, but whew boy, that boss fight needed some work. So the next question comes from Young Man, who says, Q&A, you have expressed that there's a downgrade in explosion quality and bloom when comparing it to Halo 3. But what in Halo Infinite would you say is an improvement compared to all previous entries, detail-wise? Thank you. You're awesome, by the way. So thank you, young man. Now, Halo Infinite is a 2021 game. Halo 3, Halo 2, Halo 1, those are very old now. So just by default, there are quite a lot of accomplishments that Halo Infinite makes that those previous titles simply didn't have the resources or budget or engine to handle. And one of those is animation quality in Halo Infinite is really good on the enemies. It's some of the best animation work I think I've ever seen for enemy AI, in that it kind of feels like each enemy was almost isolated from the others and developed in a bubble. Kind of like not worrying about realism. How can we animate this enemy in a way that best conveys its character and personality. When you think of the brutes in Halo Infinite, you kind of think of that, like, you know, thump thump, like that goofy run that they have that looks so heavy. And you can see like their armor bouncing and jiggling on their body and stuff. It's just everything about the way that they move feels very heavy, and they've got that stupid look on their face. Like, the brutes are just awesome. But then you jump over to the elites, and they're a lot more, like, springy and almost cat-like. If you picked up an elite in your hands, it would probably just, like, melt and feel like liquid, like it's a cat or something. They're very springy and spongy and agile looking in their animations. But then the grunts, man, the grunts. So a few nights ago, I was playing Halo Infinite's campaign, and there was this blink and you'll miss it moment that had me, like, I had to pause the game because I was just like, what? A Banished dropship came in, and the doors opened, and a whole squad jumped out. But one grunt in that squad, he landed on the ground, face planted, and the force of his face plant actually sent him back up into the air. Like, he bounced off the ground and landed completely fine on his feet. And the grunt was stunned for a second before shaking his head and, like, getting into combat mode. And it was just like, even the grunt didn't know quite what happened, but he was happy he was back up on his feet. And it's just like that, like, almost like Cuphead style, just slapstick animation with, like, the grunts. You know, if you shoot them in the hand, they have this fantastic twirl animation where they spin around like once or twice. And it's just ridiculous looking. Is it realistic? No, but it's that exaggeration that Halo has been missing for a while, because the series took itself a bit too seriously, I think, with, like, Reach 4 and 5. You know, the animations became a lot more gritty, less comedic. And it's fun seeing that, like, original trilogy camp back with the grunt animations. I love them. So the next question comes from Elite Ball, who says, Q&A, how are you feeling towards the new art style now that you've played it? Do you miss the more futuristic look of the UNSC weapons in past games, or do you miss the old Covenant art style now that we have these more industrial Banished interiors? I hope for a chance to get inside some Covenant ships of the old art style, but I guess the Banished replace them fully. So when you say UNSC weapons of past games, I assume you mean like Halo 4 and 5. I'm very happy that the look of the UNSC has kind of moved far away from that Halo 4 and 5 look, where they almost look more like Killzone creatures than they did like humans from the Halo universe. I like the new look of the UNSC. This feels more like something from the original trilogy to me. But as for the Banished, you do raise a very interesting point, which is I do feel like something has been lost a little bit when it comes to Forerunner environments versus Alien environments, because the Forerunner stuff, you have these brutalist temple-like architecture, where with the Covenant stuff you have something that's a lot more smoothened, a lot more organic, but also still very religious-y feeling. With the Banished, it's more in, like, brutalist, metallic environments, just, you know, red instead of blue. And something that I do hope 343 maybe explores a bit in the future is, I'm not sure if maybe this is an engine thing, but something that could probably do a little bit better is more just atmosphere in the air around the player. You know, a little bit more ambience, a little bit more smoke. I think of kind of like that audio log from Esheram, where he's talking about the brute homeworld kind of like having ashes and embers in the air, and he felt nostalgic about breathing in that stuff, you know? And I'm thinking, like, what would a brute ship look like? And I was kind of thinking, Chief, like, a door opens and just, like, you know, a wave of heat hits Master Chief. You can have some, like, embers kind of floating in the air and stuff like this. Almost like there's like a fire in another room, just that thick layer of smoke. In the real world here, we have candles, right? Why do we have candles? We have lamps. Well, candles are kind of like a tradition that we've carried. Like, we've moved long past the need to burn wood or burn wicks for light, but we still enjoy doing that because it's kind of like a tradition thing. Well, what would happen if, like, the brutes took a lot of their traditional, like, brute heritage and brought it on board ships with them? Could you imagine, like, a science fiction chieftain bonfire Like you come into a hangar on a brute ship or something, and in the center of it is this giant science fiction bonfire with like plasma fire roaring, crackling, and a bunch of brutes like eating meat around it or something. Because the Banished ships feel a little bit utilitarian, I guess, where it feels very like mass-produced and kind of like efficient and militaristic. But it is still run by brutes, and surely they want to make it home a little bit. I don't know, I feel like the Banished, a little bit more could be done to make them feel lived in as environments. Somebody pointed out on a stream a couple days ago, there's like no chairs in any of the Banished ships. Like, how do the brutes sit? Surely they sit, right? Alrighty, and our final question comes from Commander Harrington, who says, Q&A. What do you think about having weapons and vehicles that don't work well in multiplayer, such as the Spartan Laser or the Gauss Warthog, make a return in the campaign and custom games via Forge? The campaign already has weapons that don't appear in multiplayer, such as the Plasma Turret and Scrap Cannon, and I wonder if 343 would consider the effort of adding these weapons and vehicles into the game worth it if they're not going to be added to matchmaking. So, something about like weapon balancing, I guess, in Halo that I do think is kind of important is I don't think that every weapon needs to be balanced for both multiplayer and campaign. I think that if every weapon is competitively viable, then it makes for a kind of like a less interesting sandbox, because the campaign is a very different experience. It's not competitive. With the campaign sandbox, you have a lot more breathing room for some like wacky, just weird stuff that's not very practical, but oh man, does it do something interesting within the combat loop and the sandbox as a large. And then sometimes that can be brought over to the multiplayer. Is it competitively viable? No, you're probably going to get killed using it. Are you going to cause a lot of chaos and mayhem though? Probably. For some of those things like the Spartan Laser and the Gauss Warthog, I would like to see some of those brought into the campaign, you know, and definitely custom games. In fact, my ideal vision for Halo Infinite is I hope every single weapon from the Halo series eventually makes its way into Infinite, and I want them all to be balanced and tailored exactly as they were in the games that they appeared in, including some of the Halo 5 stuff. Would that upset the balance of matchmaking? Who cares? The developers don't need to put those on the maps, you know? There's no loadouts in Halo Infinite, and every gun isn't gonna be on every map. So it's completely within their control, and it opens the door for them to have throwback playlists where they could recreate old maps in Forge and place those old weapons and go into customs and fiddle with the settings and kind of recreate past combat loops. Couldn't it be a lot of fun to have like a Halo 2 throwback playlist, and it's got all Halo 2 weapons and they all feel exactly like they did in Halo 2. Or for some of the fans of Halo 5, you guys could have a Halo 5 throwback playlist where you could have your saw back, you could have your aiming down the sights on everything back. It could feel a little bit more closer to home for you guys. A lot of value could come from 343 bringing back everything from previous games, and don't worry about balancing because it's in their control if they want them on the maps or not. Just leave them in custom games and let the community go nuts. But I hope that answered your questions. It was relatively brief this time, and the reason why is just because, well, the last Q&A that I did, that was before launch, and so now that we have had the launch of the campaign, I'm anticipating quite a few campaign-related questions, and I encourage you guys to ask them down below. Next week, we'll probably be talking about spoilers, so just be warned going into that. A thank you to the channel members. You guys are pretty snazzy. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Okay, bye. I'm done. Bye. How do I turn this off?